But you know, the other day,
Good afternoon. Is everybody ready?
yes.
All right. My name is Brian Manley, Police Chief here in Austin, and we're here today to give you an update on the officer-involved shooting that occurred Friday night, April 7th in the 6300 block of Parliament Drive. And we will give the identities of the officer involved as well. As you all know, on the scene of these incidents, we strive to give you as much information in as timely of a fashion as possible. And what we reported the night of the incident was that our officers responded to a disturbance call involving a man with a gun, and that upon arrival, as we worked through everything that had happened, that when the suspect, Mr. Parrish, he came out of the residence at one point, he then went back inside the residence. He came out a second time, again having a rifle in his hand, and went back in the residence. And he came out a third time, raised the weapon towards our officers, and fired. We're at the stage of the investigation now where that we believe, although Mr. Parrish did raise the weapon and aim it at our officers, that he did not in fact fire that weapon, but that as he raised the weapon and pointed it at our officers fired at him in fear for their safety, and then Mr. Parrish went down as we described that night. This is still the offense of aggravated assault against a public servant. However, we wanted to put the information out as early as possible that we now believe, based on where we're at in the investigation, that he did not fire, even though our officers that night at the scene believed that he in fact had fired the weapon. We did recover the rifle as described that night, and this is something that we'll show you all a little up close if you want to take it, but this is the rifle that we actually seized at the scene the night of the incident. This is what the officer saw as he came to the door. He was holding this in his arm. Reportedly, the first time he came out, he had this pointed in a downward direction. But again, as I stated, that third time when he came out, he raised that rifle in the direction of our officers, and our officers fired upon him at that point. Again, as we stated that night, this is on video, but the video does not capture Mr. Parrish's front door based on the direction the car was pointing, but the audio captured the entire incident. And the shots that were fired were all in rapid succession and all within about 1 second time. So it was very quick, and the officer's perception at that time was that he had in fact fired towards them as well. The officers involved in this incident were Officer Paul Bianchi, who was commissioned in July of 2012, Officer Jordan Wagstaff, who was commissioned in October of 2016, Officer Dane O'Neill, who was commissioned in March of 2012, and Officer Marcus Johnson, who was commissioned by APD on November of 2012, but had 3.5 years prior experience with another agency. So those were the 4 officers that were involved in this incident. And I think it's been widely reported already, but I'll put it out as well, that the suspect in this incident was a Mr. Lawrence Parrish, and he's, I'll give you his age here in just a moment. So I believe he is 31 years old. So again, at this point, we wanted to give you the information that we normally do after an officer-involved shooting with the identities of the individuals involved, and then we wanted to put out as quickly as possible that the investigation, we now believe that the suspect may not have actually fired, but instead raised the weapon and pointed it at our officers. With that, I'll take any questions.
Do you know if Mr. Parrish is now out of the hospital?
I don't have that information with me right now.
How does information like this get misconstrued that there was shots, that came from the suspect and they didn't?
Again, this incident happened in a matter of seconds. The actual shots that were fired took place, as I said, within a second, if a second and a half, and the officer's perception in that moment was that they were fired upon. And as I said the other night, the officers immediately fell to the ground after the shots as well. So perception in those seconds when something like this is unfolding and you're in a critical incident, sometimes perceptions are not always 100% accurate.
You reported that night that y'all were getting 911 calls that this man may be on some sort of alcohol or drugs. Do you guys, have you figured out if he was on alcohol or drugs?
It was reported that night that he was under the influence, but that is still part of the ongoing investigation, so that's not something that I will confirm here today.
Was he tested for alcohol or drugs that night or around soon after it happened?
I don't know what medical staff did at the hospital. Obviously, our concern after the incident was not on getting things for evidence for us, but more for his medical care and his well-being at that moment. So I'm not sure what medical staff at the hospital may or may not have tested for.
Do we know how many shots were fired and who fired them?
That is still under investigation, but these are the 4 officers that fired. But as far as how many from each officer, I could not tell you. Again, the shots were all fired within that 1 second to second and a half period.
Do you guys know at this point where on his body he was shot?
That's not information that we're going to release at this point.
One last question.
Any idea why he shot at officers?
Well, again, at this point, we do not believe that he shot at the officers, but as far as why he directed his weapon towards the officers, no. That'll be part of the ongoing investigation. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you.